Chapter 5, Regaining One's Humanity. The Legend of Sunset Shimmer, Majora's Mask. By Ganondorf 8. September 29, 2015. Chapter 5, Regaining One's Humanity. When everything went white, I had no idea what was about to happen. Was I going to be sent back to the beginning of the 3-day period? Or, did nothing happen upon playing the Song of Time, and I witnessed everything being destroyed? In an instant, I found myself surrounded by a number of clock faces which were all ticking backwards, but before I could try to understand what it meant, I began falling through what could be the fabric of time itself. That's when the one drawback of using time travel became apparent to me, and now I wish that I had figured it out a little sooner. The few rupees that I picked up suddenly flew upwards as a sign they couldn't be taken back with me to the beginning, so does this mean I've got to collect everything that I picked up again? Does this also include the piece of heart?
Sunset Shimmer. Is that you, Twilight?
I asked.
Yeah, it's me, and you need to come to your senses right now and see what has happened,
replied Twilight. Upon opening my eyes, I quickly came to the realization that I was standing in front of the bottom entrance of the clock tower. Not only that, the sounds of construction could be heard all around me, and there were people walking about as though nothing had happened.
It looks like using that song has done the trick, for everything has started over. If you don't believe me, just look up at the moon.
As I recall from a few minutes ago, the moon was mere seconds away from destroying everything, so when I looked up at it, I was expecting the moon to be extremely close, yet it was much higher up in the sky than before. In fact, right back where it was when I first entered Clock Town.
Everything is as it was when Sonata first tasked us with finding her mask, I said. That means all of those conversations and encounters we experienced never happened, said Twilight. So if we were to say go visit Pinkie Pie, she won't recognize us even though we purchased a map from her?
I asked.
As far as I can tell, all of our progress has been reset. Everything we went through in order to reach Starlight Glimmer never took place, so we essentially have to go through it again. The Great Fairy is back to being shattered into pieces, the Deku Scrub who gave you the land title deed has his property back, and Lightning Dust hasn't committed that robbery yet,
replied Twilight.
Lightning Dust?
I thought.
What are you thinking about?
Asked Twilight.
Remember how we discussed about not being able to do certain things, and wishing that we could have gone back in time in order to sort them out? With the ability to reset time, we can change events for the better if it means helping out those who need it. Of course, if we don't get it right on our first attempt, we can remember what went wrong, and apply it for future attempts. For example, we can now stop Lightning Dust from robbing the old woman from the bomb shop, and change a horrible outcome into a good one.
I replied.
When you put it that way it does sound like the right thing to do, but we can't allow ourselves to misuse this ability, said Twilight. Perhaps the most important thing is we now have more time to figure out how to stop the moon from crashing, so if we can find the solution, this world can be saved from destruction. From there, we'll be able to figure out to change everything back,
I said. While this was definitely a positive first step towards solving what appeared to be one serious mind puzzle with time travel playing a crucial part, there was one thing which needed to be figured out.
So what do you suppose Spike meant about the 4 who have to come to the clock tower? Until we can figure that part out, we'll be going around blind and resetting time in the process, replied Twilight. Spike is your assistant given how he's been living with you ever since he hatched according to what you told me in one of your responses to a report of mine, so wouldn't you be able to understand exactly what his words meant?
I asked.
He mentioned swamp, mountains, ocean, and canyon before Starlight Glimmer smacked him, so I gather she didn't want him to mention any of that. Just give me a moment to figure this out, for I need to rely on the memories of Tattle. Got it. I bet Spike was referring to the 4 areas just outside town. There's one in each compass direction. If we were to go and check these locations, I'm sure we'll be able to find something that can help us figure out how to prevent the moon from crashing,
replied Twilight.
At least Starlight's so-called pranks are restricted to just here, I said. I'm not sure if that's true, for she did say that she was planning on bigger and better things. Clock Town must have been small in her mind, so in order to further her sense of fun, she must have done something in each of the 4 regions. That means we've got to essentially fix any messes she has caused, but how can the 2 of us do all of that despite having limitless time on our hands?
Asked Twilight.
It's not as bad as you think, I replied.
I then explained this is what I had to constantly deal with back in Hyrule, for Ganondorf did similar acts all in his bid to gain control of the kingdom through the power of the Triforce, so Starlight was following his example, but using a much different power to achieve her goal. To be honest, I'm not really looking forward to this adventure as it means having to go through dungeons where monsters and traps will be waiting, and it will be much worse because of the 3-day time limit. Since we figured out that when we reset time, everything goes back to the way it was at the beginning, progress in any dungeon will also be reset. That means I'll have to work incredibly fast unless I want to go through all of the inevitable torture again.
That mask,
began Twilight.
Even though it makes Starlight really powerful, it's also quite hideous looking, I said. Well, yes there is that, but what I was thinking is she uses the power of that mask to do those terrible things we've seen. No one else is capable of stopping her, for anyone who tried has probably met some kind of terrible fate. Well, whatever it takes, we have to do something about it. If this were Equestria right now, the QT map would be showing us where we need to go in order to solve the problem which exists there,
said Twilight.
Did you just say QT map?
I asked.
I never mentioned this before to you,
asked Twilight.
My reports to you have been about friendship lessons that I've learned, and you giving me advice on what to do, but I guess I never really asked about the interior decor of your castle. Still, the name is one that doesn't exactly roll off the tongue,
I replied. Twilight explained that after gaining her castle, which came from the Chest of Harmony upon using the 6 keys to open it, the cutie map appeared when she and her versions of my friends sat down on their respective thrones, and their cutie marks reacted. The map would show them areas that were in need of friendship along with the cutie marks of those who had to go. I commented that it sounded like the map dictated their every mission without an opportunity to consider who would actually be best suited to handle it, and Twilight agreed as she wanted to go to Griffinstone and Manhattan, but couldn't due to Rainbow Dash and Pinkie Pie being chosen instead for the former, and Rarity and Applejack for the latter.
By the way, I never knew you could play the ocarina, said Twilight. You can thank all of those songs I learned from you back in Hyrule along with those I learned from others, I said. Speaking of the ocarina, Sonata said that if you got it back, she could return you to normal. I'm not sure how she plans on actually doing that, but if she says she can then I say give her a chance. Besides, you need to regain your human form if we plan on being given permission to leave Clock Town, seeing as the soldiers won't allow you in your current form,
said Twilight.
But there's just one problem, I began. What's that?
asked Twilight.
We weren't able to get the mask Starlight was wearing, and Sonata is expecting us to come back with it in our possession. Even if she does change me back to my human form, she'll be disappointed because we failed her,
I replied.
Thanks to that song, we have as much time as necessary, said Twilight.
Again, I completely ignored the fact that the Song of Time would allow us to go back to the beginning, and even though the moon won't crash, it's just a temporary solution until we can actually stop it from falling altogether. Upon thinking about this scenario, I've defied Ganondorf's warning, and even cheated him on it because Terminal won't be destroyed, but his cryptic words do have other meanings. Maybe I shouldn't be overthinking all of this, and simply face the situation as it comes. If things go really bad during a run-through of the 3 days, we can go back and try it again in the hopes of getting it right. With that settled, I walked back inside where Sonata was sitting down eating a taco, but I waited for her to finish as I needed her full attention.
You came back much sooner than expected, said Sonata. How long has it been?
I asked.
You left this tower about 5 minutes ago, and already you've returned from your task, replied Sonata.
If there were any doubts in my mind regarding as to whether or not no one remembers what happened, this was the proof I needed to relieve myself. From her perspective, she had just recently asked for my help, which has taken me several minutes to complete as opposed to 3 days, yet I've got to keep this whole time paradox thing under control. Otherwise, I could slip up trying to remember if I did one thing, or another thing, or even not do something which helps resolve something else.
Were you able to recover your precious item from that imp?
Sonata got me back on track when she said that, so I took out the Ocarina of Time, and presented it to confirm my success.
Oh. You got it. You got it. You got it. You got it. Like I said to you before you left, this would be an easy task for one such as yourself. I wouldn't say it like that, I said. You should give yourself more confidence in your abilities, for you have so much potential inside of you. Now that you have gotten back your item, and let me say that this is quite a splendid-looking ocarina, we can proceed with the method that will change you back to normal. I've no doubt this is something you've been looking forward to for quite a while, so let's get this started without delay,
said Sonata.
What they? Where in the world did that come from?
I asked. My mouth dropped down when Sonata was suddenly sitting in front of a large pipe organ which somehow materialized out of nowhere, yet how was she able to get it in here without anyone noticing from outside? How did I not notice it before when I came up from the basement? Twilight's expression showed she was just as confused about this as I was, and yet this sort of thing was normal for Sonata given how she was rather ditzy back in the human world.
There are many mysteries in this world that are beyond our understanding, replied Sonata. Still, how could you have gotten a pipe organ in here?
I asked.
That isn't important for your desire to become human again is. Please play this song that I am about to perform, and remember it well. This is a melody that heals evil magic and troubled spirits, turning them into masks. I am sure it will be of assistance to you in the future. It is known as the Song of Healing, and like the name says, those who hear these notes will become at peace,
replied Sonata.
It turns people into masks?
I asked.
You think this is an unusual circumstance?
Asked Sonata.
Well, yes,
I replied.
Perhaps it does sound rather morbid when you consider that a person's spirit is trapped with a mask for all of eternity, but it's better for them to become like this, otherwise they shall remain tormented by the regrets of not being able to complete their goals when they were alive,
said Sonata. Even though I hope I'll never encounter a spirit who needs to be healed of their troubles, I suspect this is going to become a theme throughout this adventure. No doubt about it. Termina is more darker than Hyrule ever was, but before I could say something in response, Sonata played 6 notes on the pipe organ which gave off a loud dinging sound before repeating them again, where she then turned it over to me, and these particular notes sounded familiar to me as though I heard them before. Shrugging off such a notion, I played the Song of Healing, which made me feel dizzy for a few seconds before I suddenly lost consciousness. This was apparently another theme where I lose consciousness from any given thing, no matter how small it was. Then I found myself inside of my dreams again, where the large Deku scrub from before had been chasing after me. This time, however, it was retreating backwards, perhaps due to being afraid of the magic coming from the song. Since I didn't know what else to do in this situation, I waved my hand goodbye, knowing that this nightmare was finally over before I lost consciousness again. Upon awakening this time around, I heard something fall before making a loud thud as it hit the ground, and judging from the distance of the fall, it must have fallen from somewhere on my face.
It worked,
said Twilight.
You mean I'm back to normal?
I asked.
Yes, but this is the first time I'm seeing you wearing such an outfit with my memories as opposed to those of Tattle,
replied Twilight.
I'll admit that green does suit me well, as it goes good with my hair,
I said as I began to chuckle.
By the way, some kind of mask dropped from your face, and landed in front of you, so if you just look down for a few moments, you'll see what I mean,
said Twilight. I took her advice, and looked down at the ground where there was indeed a mask. I instantly recognized the facial design as that of the Deku Scrub tribe, but then it all started to sink in for me. Was I really trapped inside of that form until a moment ago? What happens to that form of me now? Would wearing this mask allow me to assume that form again? So many questions were flowing through my head without any answers, but then Twilight offered me a piece of advice.
If you're not sure about keeping it, then I would just throw it away somewhere, or maybe give it to someone else who desires to become a Deku Scrub for whatever reasons they may have. If I can make a suggestion?
Asked Sonata.
What is it?
I asked.
I'm glad that you've regained your human form, and no doubt you feel relieved that your nightmare has come to an end. However, you need not throw away such a mask because it could prove useful throughout your journey. Yes, I give you this mask in commemoration of this day. The day where, after struggling through many hardships, you have regained your true form,
replied Sonata. Actually, my true form is that of a unicorn, but I suppose she doesn't need to know given how such information is likely to make her feel confused. I then reached down to pick up this Deku mask, and upon rising back up again, I took a deep look at it because something made me feel both curious and frightened about it.
Fear not, for the magic has been sealed inside the mask. When you wear it, you will transform into the shape you just were. When you remove it, you will return to normal. Sort of like a transformation?
I asked.
Yes, you could say that, and know that it should help you, especially if you were to go to the southern swamp, which is where the majority of the Deku tribe dwell. Now, I have fulfilled my promise to you. I have changed you back to normal, even though you most likely questioned my methods, so, please, give me that which you promised me,
replied Sonata. This is where things were about to become really awkward, for I wasn't able to get the mask that she wanted. In fact, I didn't even have the power to do so, for Starlight Glimmer was too powerful, and I only had a few minutes before Terminal would be destroyed.
I'm sorry,
I sighed.
Don't tell me,
said Sonata.
I think you already know,
I said.
You weren't able to get it back? Normally, I would have exploded with rage because you didn't fulfill your end of the deal, but I can understand why you didn't succeed with the task. The imp has been growing more powerful with each passing moment, so the chances of getting my mask back continue to grow more challenging. That's why you don't have it with you, because she is beyond your reach, but that's fine, as it shows that you've got much more growing up to do. It also shows that perhaps I may have been a little hasty in terms of believing that you could handle the job,
said Sonata.
Are you calling me weak?
I asked.
No, but rather inexperienced when it comes to dealing with the dark power of the mask,
replied Sonata. I have a feeling that she did call me weak despite not saying it directly, yet I've seen all sorts of things during my adventures in Hyrule. Those were experiences if I ever saw them, so her words hold no ground at all. Granted, much of the time I blundered my way through, so I guess some of what she says sounds valid.
That expression you have tells me that you don't know much about that mask, and for that I must apologize to you. It was my fault not telling you about it, so now allow me to fix things by revealing all there is about the legend. From what I've already experienced by being changed into a Deku scrub, there is a lot about it I don't know other than it possesses dark powers, I said. My own research revealed the same thing. As one who has dedicated herself to selling masks, it's important for me to know every last detail, otherwise whoever comes to own the mask may not know of key details which may or may not need to be avoided. After reading about it based on what information remains, what you experienced was just the beginning. The mask. It is called Majora's Mask. An accursed item from legend that is said to have been used by an ancient tribe in its hexing rituals,
said Sonata.
Majora's Mask, you say?
I asked sarcastically, for that was the name featured in the game this world takes place in. Like I said to myself before all this started, fate has a mysterious way of making things worse than they already are. Even though I've only glanced at that mask Starlight wears a couple of times, its vile, twisted image appeared in my head where it became consumed by flames. This must refer to the ruination Terminal will experience should the moon crash.
It is said that an evil and wicked power is bestowed upon the one who wears that mask,
said Sonata. Well, that's obviously true given what Starlight has been doing, yet she started out doing simple things which annoyed people, but quickly expanded into far more dangerous territory, with the moon being the most extreme of her powers. It's just like I suspected, she has succumbed to the temptation of power instead of controlling it.
According to legend, the troubles caused by Majora's Mask were so great. The Ancient Ones, fearing such catastrophe, sealed the mask in shadow forever, preventing its misuse. How did they do that?
I asked.
My guess is they merely hid it away from the world,
replied Sonata.
You mean you don't know?
I asked.
No one has the correct answer, my young friend, for this happened many eons ago as legend dictates. The ancient tribe who used the mask have long since vanished, and the possibilities of any descendants who may know of anything remains unknown. Also, because few records remain, no one really knows the true nature of the mask's power. It could be that the imp has reached her full potential, or there could be even more to come,
replied Sonata.
Yet you still wanted it, I said. I went to great lengths to get that legendary mask, for even though the legends dictated it to be a mask of evil power, I still desired to add it to my collection. Not all of my masks are sold, you know, for some I choose to keep because I know how truly unique they are. Yet, this only applies when the masks are worn. If no one wears them, the power locked within remains dormant, thus no threat occurs. When I finally had it, after all of that searching by leaving my homeland, and venturing forth to a neighboring kingdom where it had been buried by the ancient tribe, I could sense the doom of a dark omen brewing. It was that unwelcome feeling that makes your hair stand on end,
said Sonata.
You should have just left it alone where you found it, for that could have prevented all of this from happening, I said. A small part of me wanted to do that, yet I couldn't because it's a mask I've wanted for so long, said Sonata. It sounds to me that Sonata had an inner conflict between her head and her heart with regards to whether she would take the prize that she coveted, or do the smart thing and leave it where history would once again forget it had ever even existed. The majority of her subconscious decided to follow her head, which is why Termina is in such a sorry state, and her heart has now got to deal with the aftermath, provided it even registers. Could I blame Sonata for condemning this world to its fate? In a way, I could, because her desire ended up bringing Majora's Mask back into the world, which is what the ancient tribe didn't want to see happen again.
Then again, I can't blame her as she had no idea someone like Starlight would come along, and steal the mask with every intent on using it. At least, I think that was the reason, yet this was based on my own assumptions instead of actual truth. Maybe Twilight has an answer which could shed some light? After all, she was with Starlight when she decided to steal from Sonata in the first place, but then that would involve finding some way to remember what happened through Tattle's memories. No doubt Twilight was getting better with the dual memories thing, yet it could be a lot better, which she hopes for as well. Turning my attention back to Sonata, I was about to ask her another question, but she had turned her back towards me like in an effort to ignore me, but it turns out that she was eating another taco which just came out of nowhere. So, I turned my head towards Twilight, who seemed to be hovering about as though she were guilty.
I should have stopped her,
began Twilight.
What do you mean?
I asked.
Starlight Glimmer wouldn't have that mask, and be causing so much trouble if I had been aware of things instead of just following along some kind of script. I feel that all of this is my fault,
replied Twilight.
You weren't acting like yourself, so you had no control over your actions. Besides, you didn't even know that the mask possessed all that dark power, so again this was something beyond your control. If anything, the one who is to blame is Starlight for wanting to wear it, and Sonata over there who wanted to find it,
I said.
I suppose so,
said Twilight.
What do you think about this legend?
I asked.
It was really informative as it should be given how it's been passed down for generations until it was intentionally forgotten. Now, even though I don't know much about any legends from this video game, what Sonata said sounds familiar to some of the more ancient legends of Equestria,
replied Twilight. She then floated down to the ground, and began scribbling about in the dirt, which was both convenient and disgusting as no one has cleaned this place in practically forever. Upon finishing, Twilight then floated up to my face, and asked me to take a look at her drawing in the dirt.
This image depicts a pony, who obtained a powerful artifact, and upon using it, he gained immense power where he could do anything his heart desires. Eventually, he became so consumed with power that he lost his way, and his original intentions became twisted. Once he realized the consequences of his actions, he disappeared never to be seen again. Sorry, but I don't remember that legend, I said. Really? It was one that Princess Celestia taught me personally,
said Twilight.
I left because of what I did remember,
I asked.
Guess you never got to some of the more intricate historical stories,
replied Twilight. She then started to blush in response to what she said, but then I gave her such a cold expression, it would have made even a fearsome monster freeze with fear.
Ahem. Anyway, the point is that I understand this legend about Majora's mask, and know what we need to do. We've got to get that mask back from Starlight before she does something even worse. Like what she did isn't bad enough,
I asked.
I wonder. Do you suppose Clocktown has a library?
Asked Twilight.
We didn't see one during our exploration across town when we had to find the bombers,
I replied.
If we can find a book similar to what Sonata read, we'd find out more about Majora's mask, and maybe find some way to stop Starlight,
said Twilight. I did seem to recall a shelf in the mayor's residence which was filled with books, but then that would involve having to deal with all that bickering again. I'd rather not go through that experience a second time unless it were to resolve it, so that option was out of the question.
We could try a historian, I suggested. It's not much, but it's the best we've got,
said Twilight. All of a sudden, a loud burp came out of nowhere which made me feel really disgusted, and Twilight slapped my head before using her hand to point at Sonata who caused the noise in the first place. Despite being someone who sells masks to make people happy, she really needed to work on manners, otherwise she'll lose potential customers.
Sorry for that crude behavior of mine in addition to stopping my explanation, but my stomach was growling something fierce, so I needed to feed it with a gorgeous taco before I could continue. Anyway, I was happy that Majora's mask was mine as I had spent a long time looking all over for it, and now that imp has it. I am begging you. You must get that mask back quickly or something horrible will happen to this defenseless world,
shouted Sonata. If only she knew what was going to happen in exactly 3 days from now, yet she was right about needing to deal with Starlight. That's when she dropped down to her knees, and began pleading as a means of making me agree.
I'm begging you. I'm begging you. You must do it. I have no else who I can turn to.
I sighed because this was just really pathetic seeing her like this, but then she went even further by grabbing my hands, and shaking them in a rapid fashion which quickly got on my nerves.
All right,
I shouted.
Hey,
asked Sonata.
I'll get your mask back,
I replied.
Really? You'll do it for me? I was certain you would tell me that because that's the kind of person you are. You'll be fine. Surely, you can do it. Believe in your strengths.
Believe, said Sonata. I agreed for two reasons, with the first being that because I'm the heroine, I've got to save this world, not just to return things back to normal, but also not allow myself to succumb to the pressure that is sure to occur. My other reason was I didn't want to deal with Sonata acting in such a childish manner anymore.
Before you leave, I have this which should prove useful, especially if you have a strong desire to help out others. What's this?
I asked.
Before encountering you here in the tower, I stepped outside for a few moments in order to clear my head, and this book was found by my feet. I'm guessing it belongs to the local children who are dedicated about patrolling this town, and keeping the peace. I've no need for such a thing as I am a very busy woman, so take it off of my hands, and good luck in getting my precious mask back. Remember that I'll only be here for 3 days, and then I must leave, so be sure to bring it to me before then,
replied Sonata. She then sat down on the floor before removing the large bag on her back, and placing it on the ground, where she began to rummage through.
We've seen this part before,
I commented.
There's no need to focus on Sonata anymore unless we need to come back here, but let's take a closer look at that book she gave you,
said Twilight.
Do you know what it is?
I asked.
I've seen the bombers carrying copies of it around on their person, but I didn't think much of it until some of Tattle's memories flowed into me just now. What you have here is the bomber's notebook, a special journal which you can use to record the names of people who have a problem which needs to be solved. Their schedule will be written down where we can look at it to see where people are at any given time. I'm not really sure what else there is to the notebook given I'm just going on Tattle's memories, but maybe we should speak to one of the bombers as they know much more than I do,
replied Twilight.
Oh no. I'm not going to play their little test again,
I moaned.
I don't think their game is needed anymore, and here's the reason why. Do you remember the code Pipsqueak gave you which allowed us access to their hideout, which is the observatory outside of town? What if we give that one member who stands guard the same code even though none of them have told us what it is, considering we're back at the beginning? That should impress Pipsqueak immensely, especially when he hasn't shared it,
said Twilight. My face lit up with happiness over this idea, and it was another example of how this whole time travel thing was going to be very useful. We learned their code in the previous cycle, so now we can bypass the test without having to waste time looking for them. I was thinking of paying a dojo a visit despite knowing that I'll have to restore her back to normal by finding the stray fairy, but first I'm thinking of putting that code to good use. Upon revealing my plans to Twilight, she agreed and we left the clock tower, and for me this was a huge sigh of relief. I'm back to being a human, so now many things which were inaccessible to me before due to being cursed are now opened. As we made our way back to where that hidden passageway was located, Twilight asked me why not leave town, and head for the first region. My answer was I needed items before truly getting started, as I wasn't about to make the same mistake as last time where it took me almost half of my journey to figure out how to master even a simple item like a Deku nut. No one was bullying me, or giving me a hard time, as in their eyes, I was just like them, even though my choice in clothes was probably weird. Anyway, upon reaching the passageway, the bomber who guarded it ran over, as he probably thinks I'm some kind of intruder, but he is going to be surprised when I tell him what I know.
You can't pass through here unless you say the secret code. Why is that?
I asked.
Only members of the bombers are allowed past this point, so unless you speak to Jim and take on his test, I can't allow you to continue on. 52143,
I said.
What? That's our secret code, all right, but how did you come upon it? Well, since you did say it to me, it must mean you're a member, but I don't ever recall seeing Jim making you one of us. In any case, you can go through the secret passageway, yet I still don't quite understand how a complete stranger would know something like that.
Even though I felt upset over tricking this kid because of prior knowledge, I walked into the passageway where I immediately decided to turn back. That's because while walking over this way, Twilight suggested that we just leave as soon as we enter, as we don't need to speak with Dr. Hooves or anything. As soon as I stepped back outside again, the pathway was being blocked by Pipsqueak, who had quite the serious concern on his face.
Who are you? I don't recall seeing anyone like you around here before,
said Pipsqueak.
I'm not from around here,
I said.
Well, whoever you are, I've got to admit that I'm really impressed. You managed to figure out a code that only we know. Now that's something. I like you. Someone who is pretty clever would make for an excellent bomber, so what do you say about joining us?
asked Pipsqueak.
Do you only allow humans to join?
I asked.
Until very recently, anyone was allowed to join no matter if you were human or not, provided that you could pass my test. Then one day, a Skull Kid came along, and was able to pass the test, quickly becoming a member in the process. At first she was pretty good at carrying out our mission, but when she started wearing that weird mask, things just got out of hand. That Skull Kid started to break our rules without a care in the world, and she has been playing all sorts of pranks on everyone because she thought it would be funny to see them miserable. I feel it's my fault for allowing her to join, so I decided to change our membership policy,
replied Pipsqueak.
Even Deku Scrubs?
I asked.
They come from the swamp to the south along with the Skull Kid, so me and my friends just lumped them all in together,
replied Pipsqueak. Even though I already knew about this from the previous 3-day cycle, I wanted to hear things from Pipsqueak's perspective. Starlight Glimmer earned their respect by proving herself worthy to become a member of their group, but wearing Majora's mask has changed her, which isn't surprising given I've first-hand experience because of what she said on top of the clock tower.
As I said, you would make for an excellent member, so what do you say? I'll join, as I'd like to help out those who need it in the name of friendship,
I replied.
Friendship, hey? Well, if that's how you wish to handle things, then go ahead and stick with that principle. Now, even though I don't know why Tattle is with you instead of the Skull Kid, I need her to tell that troublemaker the next time she sees her that she's outta here. She's been actin' like a real jerk lately. Is that one of our notebooks you're holding in your hand? One of my guys recently lost his, and said that a woman carrying a large bag picked it up before going inside the clock tower. I guess you were able to get the book back, so why don't you keep it as a sign of my friendship?
Said Pipsqueak.
Thank you,
I said.
I don't suppose you're aware of our rules?
Asked Pipsqueak.
Not really,
I replied.
Figured as much, but then we keep those really close to our chests because they form the heart and soul of what we do. The code can easily be changed as it's just a bunch of rules that are easy enough to remember, but form the backbone of our group. Okay. Here are the rules by which we bombers strictly follow, and I'll go into as much depth as necessary. I suspect Tattle probably told you some things given how she was with the Skull Kid when we let her in, but I'll explain things anyway. 1. Find troubled people and add their names and pictures. Originally, only 20 people could be added, but we made some adjustments, so now you can add many more. By adding names and pictures, you'll never forget what they look like. 2. Promise to help them. Mark promises with promise stickers. Don't be late fulfilling your promises. Everyone has a schedule that they follow, and apart from extremely rare cases, they'll never stray away no matter what. You can even have Tattle give you a reminder of needing to meet someone in case you're so busy, you end up forgetting what you're supposed to do.
Said Pipsqueak.
It sounds simple enough, I said. Once you start adding people to the notebook, and solve their problems, it becomes second nature,
said Pipsqueak.
Are all those who need help live in town?
I asked.
Most will be located around here given how busy this place is, yet there are those living outside town who need help as well. You don't need to help out every last person in Termina as that's quite the undertaking for just one person, but try to help as many as you can. 3. Whenever you solve someone's problem, it makes you happy, so a happy sticker will be added to your book. People whose problems you solve will give you a reward, but mainly help them for the pleasure of doing good. The reward at the end is just an added bonus which could prove to be useful. Finally, the last rule. 4. No removing stickers. Use promise stickers to keep track of people until everyone is happy. Again, try to help as many people as you can, for on your own it may be too difficult, but if you do manage to complete the notebook, you'll go down as being the greatest helper to those in need in Termina history.
Replied Pipsqueak.
Guess I should get started then, I said. You don't need to solve many problems at once, so why not tackle 1 or 2 at a time instead? That should prevent any kind of stress from afflicting you. Now that you know what is expected of being a bomber, I'll head back to my training up in North Clock Town, so if you need to find me, I'll be over there. Don't forget the rules,
said Pipsqueak. He turned around, and ran off towards the north part of town, leaving me to ponder what I should do next. There are all sorts of people around town who need help, and while I intend on helping out as often as possible, I do need to figure out where to go. I know leaving town is a must because staying here forever isn't going to work, so when Twilight suggested that we pay a visit to a dojo again for some more guidance, my suggestion was to try Pinkie Pie.
Pinkie only knows of the local gossip,
said Twilight.
Yes, but she isn't cryptic with her explanations as opposed to a dojo, I said. Adajo can't help doing that as she's the Great Fairy, and is known for not wanting to reveal the exact truth. In her mind, she wants those who visits her to figure out the meaning behind her words rather than just give it away,"
said Twilight.
"How about we visit both?"
I asked.
"Why not, as I don't think Adajo would know much about anything outside Clock Town,"
replied Twilight.
"One of her other selves will probably help us there," I said. "What? There is more than one Adajo Dazzle in Termina?"
asked Twilight.
"In Hyrule, I had to deal with 6 versions of her, with each one possessing a different power. I'm going to take a guess and say that I've got to deal with at least 4 more versions of Adajo alongside the one we need to help again,"
I replied. Knowing what I needed to do next, I began making my way over to the fairy fountain, yet Twilight flew out before me demanding to know why there were multiple Adajos, and my response was this is just how it ended up happening in Termina. She then shook her head feverishly because she refused such an answer, but then I said to her that things were going to get really weird when we see the other alternate versions of our friends and enemies. That's right. Our enemies, which is what Adajo was in the human world along with Arya and Sonata, yet here they are friends.
"Does it mean friends could be enemies?"
asked Twilight.
"That is a strong possibility, so we need to treat everyone as though we don't really know them," I replied. "No wonder you had to endure an awful lot,"
said Twilight.
"I got adjusted over time, although I do slip up on occasion," I said.
When I got to the fountain, I noticed Pinkie Pie floating up and down in the air via her balloon, and it saddened me to think that my conversations with her from before now never happened. If it were possible for me to do, I'd allow her and my other friends to remember what happened instead of them forgetting everything.
"We can talk to her after we're done with Adajo," said Twilight. "I know, but I wonder what her reaction would be when she discovers that we have the map we purchased from her before," I said. "Hey? You still have that?"
asked Twilight.
"It's right here in my pocket,"
I replied as I took out the Clock Town map. Despite having walked all over this town a couple of times because of doing all of those errands just to reach the clock tower, I'm still having trouble remembering where everything is.
"You having that map has just proven another theory,"
began Twilight.
"Which is?"
I asked.
"It seems key items come back with us whenever you play the Song of Time to go back to the beginning of the first day, but minor items end up becoming lost, which does mean backtracking is going to become a thing,"
replied Twilight. I'm surprised that she didn't figure it out sooner when you consider that I brought the ocarina back, but I suppose she was more inclined towards learning about the Majora's Mask legend, so it was an oversight. Then it dawned on me. Backtracking? Why did that have to be a thing again? It was bad enough having to backtrack in those temples last time, which really got annoying, but this sounded even worse. Just before I began to walk up the path which led to the fountain, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, prompting me to take a closer look.
"What's that up there?"
I asked, pointing to something that was nestled within the branches of a leafless tree.
"Let me take a look,"
replied Twilight. She flew upwards to get a closer look before floating over to the playground area as though she were trying to find some sort of connection between everything, and upon finishing with her inspection, she flew back to me.
"It's another one of those pieces of heart, although how anyone never bothered to take notice of it is beyond me. It looks like you can jump across this playground, and reach it that way. What about running up the slide?"
I asked.
"That looks really steep, so you may end up sliding back down," replied Twilight. "Since I need to collect as many of these as possible, I can take some time to collect it provided that I don't make any mistakes," I said. "You sound like you make mistakes constantly in this kind of setting," said Twilight. "It happens more often than you think," I said. True to form, my first attempt to reach the piece of heart ended in failure as I clearly overshot the tree when I jumped, and the result was me landing face first into the ground. Then I tried again, which resulted in overshooting again, where I landed on my rear due to tripping on a branch. After getting back up, and jumping across a third time until reaching the tree, I carefully assessed the situation before jumping, which resulted in me landing where I wanted to be, which was on the tree where my prize was. I grabbed the piece of heart, which gave me that warm feeling again, and from there I jumped back down where I landed without any problems, although I wish I had done this perfectly the first time. "How many of those things even exist?" asked Twilight. "I'm not sure, as I didn't pick up all of the ones that were in Hyrule. I think I picked up somewhere between 15 to 25 pieces back then, but don't quote me on that, so I'm assuming Termina has the same number Hyrule has, or perhaps even more than that, which would be surprising," I replied. Guess we should be on the lookout, and pick up as many as possible,
suggested Twilight.
Not all of them are scattered about like the two we've found, Twilight, for some are in the hands of people who will give them to me as a reward for helping them. Others are obtained by completing some kind of challenge, and that involves paying rupees to play, as playing for free doesn't comprehend with anyone. The more I have, the better I'll be able to survive the trials which lies ahead,
I said.
You make it sound like this will be difficult,
said Twilight.
Of course, as I've only got a sword, a shield, a mask which allows me to assume the form of a Deku scrub, and anything else I might find,
I said.
You've got your magic,
said Twilight.
Oh yeah. What a dojo gave me should prove invaluable,
I said.
I meant your equestrian magic,
said Twilight. In all of the excitement as well as worry about having to deal with the impending destruction, I completely forgot about my own magic, which is what I used constantly in Hyrule. I've realized that using my magic was a crutch for me, as I never learned how to use my other items until I reached a certain point where I had to learn how to fight differently. Does this mean I'll be relying on the same methods like before? Maybe, as I was comfortable, but this time I think I should rely less on my own natural talent, and go with what is intended, which is the Kokiri sword. When I explained this to Twilight, she slapped her forehead as she couldn't believe I'd say such a thing, and insisted that I used my magic right there and then. So I did, and what resulted was really pitiful. My magic came out like a whimpering fireball instead of a blaze, so in my eyes this was the opportunity to rely on other abilities rather than go with the usual. Twilight on the other hand wasn't as accepting of this as I was, and said that we needed to see a dojo immediately so she could figure out why my magic fizzled instead of sizzled. Our fears were confirmed upon entering the fairy fountain, for a dojo had been shattered into pieces again just like before. I guess even one such as the Great Fairy isn't immune to the ravages of time.
Young one, please hear my plea. I have been broken and shattered to pieces by the masked skull kid. Please find the one stray fairy lost in town, and bring her to this fairy fountain. Maybe we should have found the stray fairy first before coming here,
I whispered to Twilight.
Since it's still in the same place as before, we can easily bring it back here provided that we don't run into any problems,
whispered Twilight. The remaining fairies then began wondering what we were talking about, but I told them it was nothing, and that we'd be right back with their missing friend. When I walked back outside, I immediately headed off towards the laundry pool as the stray fairy was still located there, yet Twilight's words ended up coming back to haunt us almost immediately. No sooner did we reach our destination by cutting through South Clock Town, I had to stop because two people were around the corner speaking about something.
What do we do?
I whispered.
Hide among those flowers over there, and remain perfectly still so that we can listen in on their conversation. I know it sounds weird of me to say something like that, but we could learn some valuable information. As long as they don't spot you, Sunset, they'll continue without thinking anything was amiss,
whispered Twilight. She didn't mention about them seeing her, but then she was a fairy, and was small enough to not be noticed. Sighing, I slipped into the flowers where I dropped down to my stomach before I began crawling forward to get as close as possible without drawing any attention my way.
Did you hear? How could I when you haven't told me anything yet? I needed to wait until we were on break before I could say anything. You know how Master Muto gets when we start talking while on the job, for she sees it as us slacking off, especially when the bridge needs to be finished in 3 days. We've got 10 minutes, so tell me what you've heard. Master Muto sent one of the younger fellas over to Milk Road located to the right of the southern swamp, as there was a complaint about a giant boulder appearing out of nowhere, and blocking the entrance to Romani Ranch. Who would do such a thing? Don't know, as no one saw anyone suspicious in the area before the boulder showed up. Because it's blocking the entrance, they aren't able to make any deliveries to the milk bar on the east side of town, and you know as well I do how people enjoy going there to drink that Chateau Romani even though it's expensive. Even before this incident, they were having problems with their deliveries because of unusual accidents. Accidents? Someone kept attacking the supplies before they can leave Milk Road. Whoever is doing that is clearly nothing but a mean little punk who is denying people good milk. No wonder Mrs. Barton is beside herself over all of this, for she needs those deliveries in order to keep customers coming back, especially during the Carnival of Time. They've got a bunch of acts lined up to perform there, such as the Gorman Troupe, and the Indigo Go-Go's of the Zoras. Without any milk, no one is going to want to stay. How long do you think it will take that fella Master Muto sent to remove the boulder? It's pretty big, and because only one person is dealing with it, it'll take 2 days at least before the path opens. Master Muto would have sent additional aid for our fella down there, but she needs all the workers she can get to finish constructing the bridge on time. Shame we can't just blow it up. The bomb shop doesn't carry bombs that powerful enough to destroy something that big as far as I'm aware, but I suppose we could use that giant bomb the Gorons use. Then again, they have their own problems to deal with right now, so asking them for assistance would amount to nothing. Why is this happening? All of Termina has been affected by all of these weird pranks, yet some have been more violent than others. Do you think that kid wearing the weird mask has something to do with all of this? Maybe, but she just's a skull kid who comes from the swamp where those Deku live. Anyway, we've got to get back to work as our 10 minutes are up. Master Muto will chew us out if we aren't working by the time she checks on our progress, so let's get going right away.
Once the two men had left the area, I got up from my hiding spot where I brushed off the various petals and specks of dirt that clinged onto my tunic.
What do you think about what we heard?
Asked Twilight.
Starlight Glimmer obviously placed that boulder there blocking the entrance to that ranch those two talked about, but that doesn't really sound like a spiteful thing when you think about it. Instead, it's just an annoying prank designed to deny people a good beverage. Still, it's inconvenient because we can't access that area without a giant bomb which the Gorons have, but we can't pay them a visit as they're busy with problems of their own.
I replied.
Not to mention someone has been destroying that milk,
said Twilight.
Do you suspect Starlight of doing that?
I asked.
No, as that would be beneath her, and she is someone who won't resort to petty acts especially with that mask,
replied Twilight.
There was something one of them said which piqued my interest, and it was the name of a milk brand, I said. Chateau Romani,
announced Twilight.
What is it?
I asked.
I'm not entirely sure what it is even with Tattle's memories, but it sounds like it could be very useful to taste even though it will cost a lot according to what they said. Well, I suppose we could investigate this Milk Road when we finally leave town because you're not a child anymore, but we should still seek out Adajo's advice. I can't believe I just said that and with a straight face,
replied Twilight. Upon grabbing the stray fairy who was hovering above the water of the laundry pool just like before, it repeated the same thing about wanting to be taken back to its fellow fairies, so I did that immediately given there were no other distractions getting in my way. Once I returned to the fairy fountain a few minutes later, and returned the fairy, they all merged together to become one, and Adajo once again appeared before us.
Tattle, and you, kind young one. Thank you for returning my broken and shattered body to normal. I am the great fairy of magic. I had no idea that the Skull Kid was deceiving me for the moment I let my guard down, she shattered me into pieces before taking one piece away thus preventing me from being restored. As I am now, all I can offer you is this. Allow me to ease your weariness. I would have granted you the ability to use magic, but it seems you already possess that ability which strikes me as odd, for I do not remember seeing you,
said Adajo. In the previous cycle, when I restored her body back from being broken, I gained the ability to use bubbles when as a Deku scrub due to being unable to use my own magic, but then this reminded me of the elephant in the room which needed to be addressed.
I was wondering if you knew about other forms of magic,
I asked.
Magic exists all around us in ways which are still being discovered, but yes, I am aware that multiple forms do exist. The different tribes that live in this world are all capable of using their own magical skills that differ from one another, yet some are unique, for they acquire a magic which is rare to most,
replied Adajo.
I suppose you could say I have a rare form of magic, I said. And yet it appears that you feel frustrated about this power you possess, said Adajo. I then explained to her what happened when I tried using my own natural magic which ended up failing miserably, and I didn't understand why. At first, she floated about as though she were thinking hard about what she had just heard, and from my perspective, she was taking her time which made me feel like she didn't know. Eventually after much pondering, Adajo turned to face me with a smile on her face. I am sensing you come from a different world, so your natural magical power has a unique property. In some worlds, your magic can be used without any restriction, yet in others, it is held back by forces most cannot comprehend. Termina is a world which holds back your magic, thus why it is not as effective as normal, so I am afraid that if you were planning on using your magic, it will not work, or it shall but with limited success. I guess that means I'll have to use the magic of Termina, I said. It is good to see that you have a broad horizon, young one, smiled Adajo. Where I come from, I used my magic far too often, which resulted in me not applying my other skills. So now I can hone those skills instead of having them serve as a crutch while my magic takes center stage, I said. You are a courageous child for wanting to continue despite knowing that your true power does not work, but never neglect your true self, for it is the real you. Kind young one. Know that I am not the only great fairy who exists in Termina. There are 4 additional fountains located in each of the regions, but I suspect that the Skull Kid has already made sure that they are not able to help you. Scattered about the 4 temples of this land are stray fairies, which is most likely where the masked one placed them all in an effort to prevent you from saving them. Please, somehow find the stray fairies and return them to their fountains. Surely, they too will add to your strength,"
said Adajo.
"Did you say temples?"
I asked.
Each region houses a sacred location known as a temple, which are places people have gone to in order to worship the spirits who protect the land, but I am not sure why, but a strong darkness is coming from each one. Of the 4, the one located in Woodfall south of Clock Town would be an ideal place to start. As you currently are, going to the other 3 regions would be far too dangerous, so I suggest beginning your journey in the swamp. Before you leave, allow me to grant you something good so that the stray fairies will not fear you. They will not go near anyone under normal circumstance, but this will give them the solace of knowing that they will be safe,"
replied Adajo. She then raised her hands above her head, and a bright light flashed which caused a mask to appear before it floated down to me, where I took it into my eyes. The mask had quite an abundance of hair, yet it felt as though it were alive. As for the face, this must be what the Great Fairy really looks like, but then 2 thoughts popped into my head. Would wearing this mask transform me into the Great Fairy? Second, would it transform me into Adajo specifically?
"Is this similar to what I already have?"
I asked.
"The mask you now hold in your hands does not contain a spirit, so wearing it will not cause a transformation,"
replied Adajo. I breathed a sigh of relief knowing that wasn't the case, but then, what kind of mask was this supposed to be?
"I sense that you feel confused and disappointed, so allow me to explain what the Great Fairy mask can do for you. Whenever the hair begins to shimmer, it means a stray fairy is close by, and will be drawn to you. If the lost one is trapped within some kind of prison, free them first and they will come over to you as normal. You will know when there are no more fairies in the area when the hair no longer shimmers." "Is this the only mask like this?"
I asked.
"There are others which exist across Termina, but I do not know where they all are. I would suggest to always be on the lookout, for these other masks you come across each possess their own unique abilities that can be helpful depending on the situation. One mask is in the hands of a woman who travels about at night alone, yet her child worries for her safety because of thieves who prowl about. Another can be found by speaking to someone who has much guilt in his heart who resides where you found my missing piece. This is all I know, so you will need to find any additional masks on your own. I would strongly recommend collecting them, for something may happen,"
replied Adajo.
"I'll be sure to find them," I said. "Come back and see me whenever you are overcome by weariness, and speak to the one who believes she is of my kind. She has far greater knowledge of the land beyond this town than I do,"
said Adajo. She then retreated back into her fountain, leaving me with a new mask, which does sound pretty useful given what it can do. I'm going to need as much help as possible, so rescuing the stray fairies is definitely worth my time. Judging from what she said just before departing, each of the great fairies really only has knowledge of the area they happen to be located in, so someone who has been around all over the place would be better for getting information.
"That mask is certainly strange looking,"
commented Twilight.
"I actually thought wearing it would change me into her," I said. "Not every mask can do that, Sunset Shimmer, but I do understand why you thought that way. Anyway, we need to go to Woodfall first, which lies to the south, but then we can check out this Milk Road and Romani Ranch once that boulder finally gets destroyed, provided those 2 men were accurate in their description of they,"
said Twilight.
"We're going to Woodfall when we reset time again," I announced. "Why not go now?"
asked Twilight.
"I want to get those 2 masks Adajo mentioned, and maybe some other items before we head to the south. Like I said, I want to get as many items as possible, so that I'm prepared when the time comes. Besides, I want to stop Lightning Dust from robbing that old woman, and yes, that is who Adajo was talking about. We'll take care of some business here in Clock Town before seeing what is happening at the ranch, but before we do anything else, I think we need to see Pinkie Pie,"
I replied. With that, I exited the fountain, and made my way over to Pinkie Pie, who was still floating about with her balloon. Hopefully, I've made the right decision here, and am not making a big mistake. To be continued. End of chapter.